Good morning, period one. I almost said World War II. I don't because it's on my screen. Anyway, good morning, period one. So, it's pretty obvious what I'm doing, but I am filming my slide presentation for a World War II in-depth research project. So, the topic that I chose was World War II love letters, and I chose the love letters because I thought that it would bring out like the most emotion out of the other topics that were chosen. I know it doesn't seem like something that would really bring out emotions, but I thought it would because a lot of the letters that have been written are pretty emotional in the sense of like the couples don't really know if like their husbands or their like wives are passing away or I'll get into it. So, so my first topic is secret LGBT love stories. So group part. So I wrote about Dave and Brian, and I read about Gilbert and Gordon. So I'm gonna talk about Gilbert and Gordon first because their love story was a little bit different. So Gordon had been going by the pen name G, just G, nothing else but G, because it was shunned to be in a relationship with the same sex back in 1945. Like honestly, it wasn't really something that people were accepting of until like maybe 10 years ago. So it's not surprising that they would hide something so secretive from people. So they had written in their letters that their parents wouldn't understand their love because they didn't know what love was. At some point, G got so scared of the fact that their letters might become public and they might be arrested that he wanted Gilbert so badly to burn the letters so that nobody else would see them. I thought that that was upsetting because I couldn't imagine somebody in this situation nowadays. I mean, I could because homophobic people are still a thing, but I look back on it and I think they might have been able to thrive in a relationship nowadays. So it's nice to think that people in the army they fought for the freedoms that we have in America now. So they fought for something that they wanted then so that people now can have it now, if that makes sense. And in the case with Dave and Brian, they had both been drafted to the war. And in their letter, it really talked about like their love story was just like any other regular love story. Like the only difference was is that they were a same sex couple. Like they went on dates. They didn't really call them dates because being on a date with the same sex person was considered illegal. You could get arrested for it. But they went on dates kind of. And even at one point there was a promise ring given to Dave on one of their dates. And at some point that they had even fallen asleep behind a theater, like, and not gotten caught, which surprised them a lot. So, I just thought that was really cute because it just was like any other regular love story. And he goes in depth through their entire relationship basically in just one letter, which I think is crazy because how many more stories do they have if this many fits in just one letter? Okay, so my next my next thing I wrote about was this one-sided love story, or so he thought. So this is Bill and Bernice. So Bill and Bernice had previously met, but Bill's parents didn't know Bernice. So they had written a bunch of times back and forth and Bill thought that she didn't love him. But if you read through the letters, she clearly did because she says in her letters that she did love him and he thought he was just a nuisance to her, which I think I don't think it's funny, but I do think it's funny. So I think it's funny that he thought that he was being a nuisance to her when all she wanted was for him to really write to her and just to be able to hear from him. Because during this time you didn't know if your loved one had lived or had died. So the fact that she had gotten any letters from him was just such a thankful feeling for her because she just wanted to know that he was okay. And she clearly did love him more because she wrote him a lot. I read through a bunch of letters, like more than at least 10 letters. So she was completely infatuated with him and he was completely infatuated with her. He loved her so much that he sent a picture of her to his family, calling her the most beautiful girl in the world. And his family complimented her, saying that they completely agreed 100%. I just thought that was really cute, and that was something that was really worthy to write about, because it showed the happier parts of being in such a terrible situation as war. Okay, so this next story, this is Virginia and her husband Rolf. So, Virginia talks about how her pregnancy is going because presumably her husband got drafted right before the war was over. So this letter was dated in 1945, right before the war was over. So Virginia had gotten pregnant, and she had talked about how her pregnancy is going, how big she had gotten, and she talked about how proud she was to be having the person that she really, really loves babies. The person she really, really loved baby. And she felt like she had a part of him with her all the time, even if something had happened to her. And I just thought that that was really sweet. And she had taken time out of her busy work day, because at this point women had been working in like the work fields because the men couldn't. So she had taken time out from her day and from her like lunch break to be able to write him as much as she could in that like little amount of time after she had like eaten, because she was pregnant. So this letter was found like under a staircase like 70 years later. Thankfully, Rolf survived. They got to raise their baby together, and their son got to read the letter with Rolf. And it just brought out a wave of emotions in him that like, he hadn't really had since there, like maybe a couple years after the war, which I thought was really sweet. I really love this story because it's just so cute. Okay, so this next slide is Words of Love. So, as I said earlier, Bill called Bernice the loveliest person in the world, and he showed his family a picture of her, and they understood why he said that, and why he loved her so much, because she was just so beautiful, and her personality was so beautiful. She had written a bunch of beautifully written words. He called her Dearest Bernice, and you don't just call somebody who is your friend Dearest. And I had talked about a couple earlier, Dave and Brian. I didn't really go into too much depth, because if I do, I might cry because you'll understand. But I just wanted to read part of what Brian wrote to Dave. Um, he wrote, "The cold, windy night, we crawled through the window of the GI theater and fell asleep on a cot backstage, locked in each other's arms. The shock when we awoke and realized that miraculously we hadn't been discovered." Which was just something that I thought was beautiful, because they were able to show each other love without being caught. And the sigh of relief that must have been washed over them after they had realized that they weren't caught must have been a huge sigh of relief. So they got to be so close, and then they didn't get caught, which must have been just amazing. What I thought was so beautiful about their love story is Brian actually wrote about the moment in time that he saw Dave for the first time. And it was just like he saw him and he just immediately fell in love. It was love at first sight, which I just thought was really beautiful. And I keep saying that because it just was. And at some point, like I said earlier, they had given Bill, excuse me, Brian had given Dave a promise ring. And I think that was before they got drafted, and they had talks about life after the war and what they would do, and how they would live with each other. And I thought that was really exciting until we go to our next slide. Yes, we can't have love without heartbreak. So when I was reading Brian's love letter to Dave, I had read a part that it was really a twist, because I thought that this was going to be a letter to Dave because they were finally going home, but no. So Brian found out after everyone else had found out that they were going home. So Brian found out that David had passed away during the war, and he was completely devastated. Like, there's a reason that I could only do one story that was just so heartbreaking, because my heart shattered. And anyone who had read what I had written in my book report too, it hurt them a lot, because they were like, how can you fall in love with somebody and then them having passed away due to war. But something that Brian wrote to Dave was the happiness when told we were going home and the misery when we learned that we would not be going together. And he wrote that he cried while he was on the boat that was taking soldiers home, and he didn't stop until he got to the other side. And his entire letter ended with the words, "Sleep well, my love," which really it just struck me because like the connotations with the word sleep in like his letter specifically is like it just brings back the memory of like them falling asleep in the theater, which just makes the fact that Dave had died a whole lot sadder. But anyway, thank you for listening. This was my presentation. I hope you liked it. Um, yeah. Have a nice day.